More than 300 Amazon and nearly 100 Google employees have signed an anonymous letter condemning the companies for their business dealings with the Israeli military. Employees blasted the corporations for signing the contract the same week that the Israeli military attacked Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, killing 250 people, including more than 60 children.
The letter, published in The Guardian, reads, quote, Project Nimbus is a $1.2 billion contract to provide cloud services for the Israeli military and government. This technology allows for further surveillance of and unlawful data collection on Palestinians and facilitates expansion of Israel's illegal settlements on Palestinian land. We cannot look the other way, as the products we build are used to deny Palestinians their basic rights, force Palestinians out of their homes, and attack Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, actions that have prompted war crime investigations by the International Criminal Court. Great friend of the show, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins joins us now. Welcome back, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what do they mean it's an anonymous letter that they all signed? I think that makes it not anonymous, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know that they're employees of Amazon. But let me say, I always respect the right of people who are working for private companies to voice their displeasure with a decision. And ultimately, if they want to leave that company, then leave that company. I think there's nothing more, patriotic and nothing more that exemplifies freedom of expression than doing so.
Do you expect that the companies, either Amazon or Google, will be responsive to this pressure from their own employees?
I do. I think that the fact that the letter has gone public and press is starting to pick it up will demand some type of response. You know, this isn't the first time we've seen this happen before. We've seen this happen with Google. We've seen this happen with Amazon and, the technology for drones for the U.S. military. And that necessitated a response as well. So I think it's going to be hard for technology companies moving forward to participate in this type of behavior and not have some type of response from their workers.
How tough do you think it is for these workers to find where to draw the line? These are workers who work for Google and Amazon.
Yeah.
And so, at some point, they've begun to make compromises. Everybody makes compromises in their life. That's part of living in society. But what do you think it is about this particular issue that enabled them to get at least hundreds of people to say that the other things that they've done, I'm not going to protest, but this we're protesting?
I think Israel and Palestine is a really hotbed issue right now. Obviously, it's always been a hotbed issue. But I think right now, given the politics of the world and the politics of the country, I think you're seeing it become even more of a political football. I think that everybody's got to have their red line. And in this instance, I think this is the red line for these workers. It doesn't seem like across the company-wide, it's been a red line. But for, this 100 or so workers, this really pushed a button.
It's an interesting red line because, as Ryan mentioned, these are companies that actually have a lot of questionable, at best, questionable business practices. And this was sort of put to the test in the Ben & Jerry's interview with Axios earlier this week, where it was sort of saying, well, are you going to continue selling things in Texas or states that have abortion laws that you deem objectionable? And it is sort of starting to crystallize into, I think, a problem for corporations that are drawing bright red lines on one issue. It seems like it offers an opportunity for a PR stunt in some cases, whether it's Disney saying, well, we aren't going to do work in Georgia anymore if they pass this anti-abortion law. Is this more? I mean, do you think there's anything internally at these companies, tech companies, Amazon, that will start pressuring them to, have a more sort of moral, capitalistic conduct in general, or do you think that's kind of an impossible game to play anyway?
Well, I think, listen, this is a gift and a curse. On one end, I think everything has become more hyper-partisan, and so, everyone has felt more attention and more engaged in terms of politics, but that in and of itself can be a gift. We're seeing people become more engaged in politics and more aware of what their companies are doing, more aware of what's going on in their background and in their communities. And I think that that's something we should all celebrate. So, I think it can be a really good thing. And I think it can also be a really bad thing in terms of the political ramifications of all of this. So I think we kind of just have to stay tuned as to what happens, honestly, in the 22 and 24 elections.
It's interesting. Boycotts, throughout most of let's say the last 100 years or so, typically were the result of public pressure from populations from organized groups saying, do not purchase goods from this company until X demand is met. Do not travel to. I remember in the 1990s it was South Carolina. They wouldn't take the Confederate flag down in front of the State House. I think it was. Now you're seeing a lot of pressure on corporations to make business decisions based on organized pressure from inside the company. And given that we're becoming so polarized, could you actually see a situation where you do have major corporations who just internally, to deal with their internal politics, are like, you know what? If Texas is going to ban abortion, then we're not selling pickles there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're starting to see it now with companies that moved to Texas for the tax breaks and are now having to deal with the fallouts of not just their response to COVID-19, but also their response to the abortion ban. And I think, especially with publicly traded companies, you're seeing the dichotomy between, their responsibility to shareholders, but also their responsibility to their workers. And when you start to see a convergence of, disapproval from shareholders and from workers inside the company, you're really in trouble. And I think that that's something you're going to start to see not just in Texas, but you're going to see in Georgia and across the South, where states are starting to implement a lot more conservative laws. And
I'd be curious for Emily's take on this too, but it does seem like this kind of what Marco Rubio is calling woke capitalism is becoming something that the right is genuinely concerned about. Rubio even introduced legislation that would, ban companies from making, particular business decisions that were driven by, worker demands or by even, brand reputation, because what Rubio was understood is that these companies are not doing this sort of thing just because they want to. Like there are business reasons, that they're making what he sees as these ridiculous woke decisions. And so he's saying, well, you can't factor in your brand loyalty, you can't factor in recruitment and retention of employees, which is just a hilarious amount of control that he wants the government to have over corporate decision making. But it does seem like the right is taking this situation extremely seriously. Obviously, this is just something they're throwing against the wall and is absurd. Yeah. But the fact that there's a legislative response to it is somewhat meaningful.
Yeah, I think there's a section of the right that is taking it extremely seriously, and I think that's why the Chamber of Commerce is increasingly hesitant to align itself with the right, and the right is increasingly hesitant, at least some sections of the right, to align itself with the Chamber of Commerce, because that would, ultimately there's some sort of desire for government control in a way that there wouldn't have been in a different era. And just to wrap things up, Michael, I think it was pretty funny that Alexi McCammond was the one who was doing this interview with Ben and Jerry's about sort of where they draw the line in these business decisions, because Alexi McCammond is somebody who was tossed out of this brand new job as editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue after employees internally complained about some egregious tweets that she had sent as a teenager. And instead of, working with her through this moment and putting out an apology and talking about how she's changed, they just booted her. And so McCammond has sort of been on the other side of what happens when workers this is internal. This was Teen Vogue workers, and it's like, where do you draw the line? You work for Condé Nast. It's like you work for corporate media, but you're drawing the line at old tweets from a teenager. Michael, how do you think corporations are going to start thinking? Like, is it almost like we're getting to a point where corporations are just going to throw up their arms and be like, we can't even make these, we can't be drawing these red lines anymore, we're just going to do business? Do you think it'll hit that kind of point, or do you think they're working through something that'll actually lead to a good outcome?
I think we're working towards a conversation that needs to be had about measured responses. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the fact that Republicans are really talking about government interference in private corporations' actions, which really goes against kind of where Republicans have historically stood over time. And so I think when you look at Alexi's situation, someone who I want to acknowledge I'm friends with and have been friends with, I think that one of the things we risk is having overreactions and not measured responses to things that we can actually have a conversation about and have be a learning experience.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.